Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are you all? It is. Did we lose Angela? Okay. Speaking of bathroom, if y'all looking for my wife, that's probably where she's at. I got to take her somewhere tomorrow at 8 a.m. in the morning. So, but anyway, oh, you finally got it, Wendell? He wasn't even talking to me. I thought he was making a joke back. But anyway, I don't know if y'all heard about Michelle Daniels. She was in the hospital, but she's home. She started having chest pains, but they didn't find nothing, and she's at home right now. She had called me yesterday morning. She said she thought she's all right, but thought she better not take no chances. And she did the deal through Polk and sent her straight to Rome. Y'all probably done that a time or two yourselves, but continue to pray for Michelle and Kevin as he's recuperating. She's supposed to be taking care of him. Now he's having to kind of take care of her, so it's a good thing he's healing up pretty good. I don't know if they're still going to be able to, but if she feels better, they're supposed to both be working Bible school next week. So pray for Vacation Bible School. It'll start this Sunday at 6:30 and go through Thursday from 6:30 to 8:30 each night. I pretty much ran all the background checks. I've got 3 more, and the 2 last ones are bringing me I already ran yours, and I didn't find nothing. Why are you laughing? You got by, didn't you? I didn't find what I didn't find what you thought I was going to find, did you? Yeah. But anyway, everybody's come back clear except Sammy, but they knew that. Well, I didn't even say it's bad. It just wasn't clear. So anyway, no, it said something about. Anyway, I was going to go somewhere, but I chose not to, not knowing I hesitate to respond. So yeah, something like that. So. But continue to pray for, like I said, this past Sunday, everybody we've been praying for pretty much showed up to church Sunday, and that was good seeing them and having them here. And I know we're getting ready to go into vacation time and things like that. And so, but I was really shocked. This past Sunday was a great crowd of people here. I wasn't expecting that, but it really was a good crowd of people here this past Sunday. So it is the life of summer vacations. If you're watching us by YouTube Live or Facebook Live and you have a prayer request, just type that into the comment section, and we'll get those a little later on when we go back and look at the reactions. We'll be able to see what you wrote. And I'm wondering, is there any prayer requests right here on this side? Anybody? How about right here? Do y'all have any? Pray for June. Ted? Timmy Little. Okay. Timmy Little. Is that Aaron Little? Kenneth Little? Is he kin to Aaron Little and them? Distant? Okay. Okay. All right. I don't know if I was talking. I can't remember if I was talking to Wendell. I was talking to somebody back there. Y'all remember my friend Rob Lambert that came here like the first April I was here, and he kind of preached to us for a long time. He told all them weird jokes and stories on me and preached his heart out. He's not doing too well, and I mean that he's not doing very well. And I told his wife we'd be praying for him. I was trying to go see him, because he actually lives in Hansville, which is right by Coleman. They're a little bit closer now. I could probably run over and see him, but his wife was trying to take him on a trip down to the beach. I don't know if that's ever going to be able to happen again. That's how bad things are. So this after Bible school or something, I'm going to try to run over and catch up, spend some time with him. But pray for Rob. I know he'll appreciate that. Anybody else got any prayer requests? Danny Ward? See there, I heard. Even with the air conditioning going, I heard it. See, there's no talking in the background competing for my hearing. Must mean I need to get a hearing test, huh? Anyway, anybody else? How about unspoken prayer requests? Anybody? All right. Let's join our hearts in prayer. Father, we thank you for tonight. Thank you for the time to wrap our heart and our mind around your word, especially when you look at this 3rd chapter of Daniel. Lord, lots and lots of lessons to learn from this. And Father, I thank you that we bring our prayers and petitions to you. The best hands they could ever be in is your hands, Father, the author and the finisher of our faith, and also the Savior that the world truly needs. Father, I thank you that you'll be with those that are in need of prayer, those unspokens, those mentioned by names. Father, I just pray for understanding. I pray for closeness with you during this time. And Lord, we pray for Vacation Bible School. Lord, we pray for the hearts of boys and girls, and I pray for the hearts of the workers and the teachers and the helpers. And I just pray, God, you do an amazing work in the life of our church because of it. Thank you for a church that would put all efforts and best efforts forward, Lord, to love on some kids and teach them about you. And we ask this in Jesus' name, amen. I'm very excited. It seems like, and unbeknownst to me, I don't know if anybody heard what Dana said, their whole goal this summer, right now, they're at the park doing I hope I'm getting it right, sidewalk chalk ministry, and they're sharing about their faith in open public places, and that's what this whole summer's about. And I think that's good. And she wanted me to remind you as soon as, not that it affects anybody in here, but if it does, she said, please remind everybody at the close to remember to come on down there and come on down there and get your child. So I don't know if that applies to anybody here, but I did what I was asked to do. And so anyway, we're gonna continue our journey in the book of Daniel on that third chapter, which is very familiar to us. It seems like they can't never win. It seems like I always have to remind myself, even though Nebuchadnezzar comes around, I have to remind myself that he was a very vile, evil king. And basically some of the stuff he talked about, what he was going to do to people, is what we call R-rated things. And some of the rituals and things that he could have had done and what was known to happen during those times. And so where we left last time was he had a dream, and Daniel was able to tell him what that dream meant. And it's funny because in his dream, he basically dreamed of a statue. And different areas of that statue, starting with the head, was gold and silver, and then bronze, and then iron and clay, And we talked about what all that meant. And basically that meant the future of the different reigns of government or whatever would happen. And so, but his was the one of gold, and that was what was taking place right then. Now, I want you to hold on to that thought, because we leave that, and I'm sure he was it was in all wonderment. Hey, I represent the goad. God has been good to me, or whatever. The gods, probably in his mind, were being goods, because we just go right to it. It says this, and we'll go through the first 7 verses, and then we'll go back and ask some questions and ponder on some of that. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its width was 6 cubits. That's 90 feet by 9 feet. That's what that means. 90 feet by 9 feet. He set it up in the plain of Dura at the province of Babylon. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, and the counselors and the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and the officials of the provinces, and to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, and if you want to know what a satrap is, it's more like a protector or whatever, as best I could find out. And the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of providence gathered together. Now, I went through this list several times because it repeats itself several times, and I thought, where in that does it call for people like Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and all that? But I guess that's what they would be included in the officials of the provinces, because that's kind of where their titles would have ranked them. Because it doesn't come out and say them, but they were included in that list. So the officials of the province and gathered together for the dedication of the image of King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now, I'm not a real smart man, and most of you would agree with that, but I don't understand making an image of oneself if you're still alive, especially if you're requiring worship. I'm sure there's a reason, but it just kind of sticks out to me right there. Verse 4 said, Then a herald cried out aloud, To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages. I mean everybody. that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, and the psaltery, and the symphony of all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And lastly, number 7. So at that time when all the people heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, the symphony, and all kinds of music, all the people, nations, and language fell down and worshiped the golden image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So one is about, he says that it's what he set up. One said it was representation of him, so we're given a little bit of information about that. And so basically, if we look at this whole chapter, we're looking at two things. Faith in the face of fire, and then definitely that fourth person that was running around in that fiery furnace. We see that. This particular chapter, we don't see Daniel. He's mysteriously not there. I don't know why. If you got some good reasons, but only people that are brought up at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they're the ones that refuse, that are actually thrown in, and they refuse to bow. And basically, we're going to see this conversation back and forth between these two. So Nebuchadnezzar's golden image is what we just read about. We're going to see the reaction of the friends in the third section, the last section. We're going to see how Nebuchadnezzar does a complete 180 around to praising God. And I'm going to tell you, God is the only one that can get a hold of a vile and evil king like that. I mean, it could have, here's the thing, it could have went so many other ways and God was still over everything. But it's the way that God got Nebuchadnezzar's attention that always has stood out to me. So, question is, what was it that King Nebuchadnezzar, what did he set up in the plain of Dura? What was it? The golden image. Anything else we know about this golden image? It was huge. It was how many feet tall? 90. And how many feet wide? 9. Okay? All right. So, what else do we know about this image and this statue? Who did it represent? Nebuchadnezzar. King Nebuchadnezzar wanted to be recognized as a god, as if we didn't. It kind of follows suit to a lot of those ancient cultures. There wasn't just one god, there was many gods. And I'm going to tell you something. I don't know. Let me take a little side journey here. I don't understand. I don't know what's worse. Having many, many gods that you're trying to appease and serve, or one God that you got a bunch of man-made laws and commandments you're trying to keep up with. You see what I'm getting at? They both kind of keep you whatever. So we would be so harsh and so fast. But it's like those many gods serve all those same areas. Well, there's the God of, multiplying, having offspring and children. There's gods that you sacrifice those children to. There's all kind of evil and good and so-called, ancient gods that have been talked about. And I don't really like it, but sometimes when people refer to the Christian heritage or the Judaism and all that, they talk about, they try to throw us in there with everybody else. But as far as I know, we're the only one that requires and says he is only one true God. There is no God above him. And so we see that. So this golden image, so evidently 60 cubits, if it equals 90 feet, then a cubit would represent what? A foot and a half, I guess, if my math's right. And if you do the math like that, times 1.5, you will come up with exactly 90 feet and by 9 feet. So like I said at the beginning, I want us to think about that dream that Nebuchadnezzar had in Daniel 2, and he turns around and makes this image. But notice that this image was all gold. Now, a lot of guys realize that it's probably not solid gold because the construction of what they would use would be wood on gold. So probably it was a gold-covered structure, and then they fashioned the gold with, likeness and all that, but there was a wooden, what wasn't probably solid. But if it was solid gold, can you imagine what it would have taken to have stood that thing up? I mean, that just, and if you were pouring it solid, how much gold had to be melted down? Either way, it was very large, like Sammy said. And notice the difference is that this statue is all gold. It's as if Nebuchadnezzar is kind of looking back at the dream and saying, nope, I'm here now. It's all gold. That's the way it's going to be. And it's funny how somebody can hear something, see something, and their rendition of it, or perhaps trying to make it something that it's never going to be. But it's so ironic that he chooses to do this the very next thing. It's like he deliberately tried to make the entire thing out of gold, as if his deity and reign would last forever, even though he'd just been told. So like I said, you know, it was probably gold covered, probably wasn't solid. And then there was this one thing I found about the plain of Dura. I don't know how true it is, but if you go out to where the plain of Dura is now, where they think it was at, I found this out, that there's a rectangular mound out there about 20 feet high, and it's the exact square of about 46 feet at the base, and it would resemble a pedestal where there might have once been this golden image. It's a colossal statue, and if you got something that's 9 feet wide, that heavy, 90 feet tall, I mean, we're talking something probably at least 4 times as high as this ceiling, right? That's pretty tall, isn't it? And I would say beyond our cross, our steeple, beyond that. And then 9 feet wide, I don't know, here to the end of that. And that's how big it was. Probably was on a big, you know, stage area or pedestal or whatever. So anyway, and as I said, the satrap in Persian would mean protector. And basically all those guys from all the provinces, and notice it said even languages. Now, why was that important? Why was that said in a decree? Well, were they not grabbing people, enslaving people from different places? And it wasn't just enough for the true Babylonians to worship. They had to be everybody. That means complete domination over everybody, including any foreigners that lived in that land. Anybody had to come to it. And so, anyway, my other question is, what kind of punishment did he threaten if the people did not worship? What was he going to do to them? He's going to throw them in a furnace. That's you know, we're going to see another type of punishment later that he talked about. But he told them if they could. Last week he just said, y'all remember what he said? He said, if you can't interpret it, tell me what I dreamt and interpret it for me. What did he say he was going to do to them? Y'all remember? He was going to destroy them. Their houses were going to be a heap of ash. I mean, your family's going to die because of that. And they began that process, okay? And I want you to keep that part. They began the process. And then as we get toward later, that's going to tie in a little bit too. He was just like many, many politicians of that day. They take religion, okay, and they try to strengthen their grip on their society and have power. We might think that happens today, but it does. Did you know it still happens today? They're happy to blend together spiritual allegiance and national allegiance. A good example of that would be like in 1936 when Herr Bader von Schirach, the head of the youth program for the Nazi Germany, said it. This is what he said. He said, if we act as true Germans, we are acting according to the laws of God. And whoever serves Adolf Hitler, the Fuhrer, serves Germany. And whoever serves Germany serves God. Okay? Another example of this happened in 1960 when the president of Ghana, he kind of had a slightly larger than life-size statue of himself. Does that sound familiar? And he erected it in front of the National House of Parliament. An inspection on the side of the statue read, seek ye first the political kingdom, and all other things shall be added unto you. What does that sound like? Matthew 6:33. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added unto you. Talk about sacrilegious. Okay? The statue was destroyed after a bloodless coup in 1966, but it has happened. We think that sounds so ridiculous, but it's not been far removed, and it's still happening today. It really is. So let's go on down. We're going to see things change. We've got this statue. We've got the rules laid out. We've got the punishment that's going to happen. We've got what it looks like. We got the instruments, what it sounds like, the instructions of what to do when you hear it, and who it applies to. So that's what we got in the first 7 verses, okay? So we're going to read up through verse 12. verse 8 says, therefore, that certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. Now, what have we learned? That this wouldn't make much sense, but because you and I have traveled through chapter 1 and chapter 2, we've been introduced to who the Chaldeans were and who they were no longer about, and what possibly could be that when they used the term Chaldeans, it wasn't necessarily referring back to those seers and those astrologers, but it was a slang term. But either way, we know that the Chaldeans, the reason I'm bringing this up, what did the king start doing when it came to Daniel last week? Daniel, they was getting ready to get killed, weren't they? They didn't know what was going on. They just knew that everybody was getting killed. So I'm bringing this up because many of the Chaldeans who did not answer the kings, he had already sent word. He was already in the act of killing and destroying them, okay? I'm bringing it up for a reason. Don't you think, after what Daniel did last week in chapter 2, that they might be a little judgmental, jealous, mad, whatever? Yeah. And so here we go. Before we read about Daniel or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, any of those guys, the remnant of the Chaldeans, I guess the ones that didn't get killed from last week, okay? So here they are. These Chaldeans came forward and they accused the Jews. Well, you know, he had brought certain Jews out of the tribe of Judah. He had trained them. We know how they got there and how God had showed his favor on them, all right? He says, they spoke and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Where have we heard that before? These cats, they got a formula. These Chaldeans have a formula. Was that not the very same thing when he called for them? They said, O king, may you live forever. I don't know if they meant it, or that was a word of endure, or pouring praise over to find favor with him. But I don't see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and I don't see Daniel. I don't see those guys approaching the king that way. So we see it again. O king, live forever. Doesn't that kind of buy into what Nebuchadnezzar's doing? A god, what do gods do? They live forever. A true God is somewhat eternal, whether the person that reflects that is dead or not. They become godlike, or however you want to do it. But it all plays into it. So they said, O king, live forever. In verse 10 he says, you, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, and the psaltery, and the symphony of all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the gold image. Now, I know my brain works a little different, but that's what I don't understand why he had to go to image. Did he want people to worship him or just worship the image? You know? But notice they don't say you, they just say the image. I don't know. I don't know if that's a play on words, if it's nothing to be taken serious or not. And he says in verse 11, whoever does not fall down in worship shall be cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And then last, this verse, it says there were certain Jews whom you have sent over the affairs of the provinces. So that's where, like I said, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, that's when he announced out for all those people. They were over the affairs of Babylon. That old Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, they have not due regard to you. They have paid due regard to you. They have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up. Now, I think it's important. So, who was accused of not worshiping the gold image? In the bed to go. Yeah. Okay. Their actions were not public, but neither were they hidden. Okay? These three Hebrew men, they would have known that sooner or later they were going to be discovered, but they chose to what? Obey God instead of man. And Spurgeon says this. Think about what he says in conjunction with this. He says, you will not be able to go through life without being discovered. A lighted candle cannot be hid. He says, there is a feeling among some good people that it will be wise to be very reticent and hide their light under a bushel. That's optional what we were talking. Hide it under a bushel? No. We're going to let it shine, right? And so he said that. He says they intend to lie low all the wartime and come out when the palms are back, when they're not being disturbed. He says they hope to travel to heaven by the back lanes and soak it into glory in disguise. That's little old English talking to me. He said, "Ah, me, what a degenerate said." That's what Spurgeon said. Is that not true? Listen, if we go the way of Christ, it's not going to be easy. This road is rocky. This road is curvy. You never know what's going to come at you, and you can't just hide out. And I know people like that. And I can say that probably some times in my life when I just kind of hit out when I should have done something more and it didn't. We're all not innocent of it, you know. But he brings a very good point. This was the time where they could have yielded. Russ Taff, I think I may have said this before, but I know you knew Russ Taff. If you follow the Gaither vocal people, Russ Taff was one of their singles with Wells Larnell Harris, good old Kentucky boy Larnell Harris. My son and daughter-in-law lived 1 mile from his house, where he lives in Louisville. I went by there and said, "There's Larnell's house," and that's where I see him shooting. He's getting up there in age. He probably don't get out, but he used to chip the golf ball around. He had a field out beside his house. But Russ Taff sang for them. He wrote a song back in the mid-'80s about this very verse. And he contemplated like this. He talked about the Bible verse. The second verse, he said, this is what it looks like when you don't yield to peer pressure. When you don't drink because everybody else is drinking. You don't do this because, he said, but that's just like bowing down to an idol when you won't stand. And I always remember that song that Russ Taff put out about that. It's called Not Gonna Bow. That's what it's called, Not Gonna Bow. And so, here we go. This is something else I quoted. I want you to listen. This is another word by Spurgeon on this. So I planted all that to plant some seeds. So we've got the scene here. They're not going to bow. They have been accused. They've been told on. And they're fixing to find out what's about to happen. This is what he said. If standing before a heart-searching God at this time, you cannot say it is true, how should you act? If you cannot say that you take Christ's cross and you are willing to follow him during all the hazards, then hearken to me and learn the truth. Dude, this is what he says. If you're not going to do that, this is what he says. Do not make a profession at all. He says, do not talk about baptism or the Lord's Supper, nor joining a church, nor even being a Christian. He said, for if you do, you will lie against your own soul. Those are hard words, aren't they? He said, if it be not true that you renounce the world's idols, do not profess that it is so. It is unnecessary that a man should profess to be what he is not. Wow. Superfluidity of naughtiness. That is an old English. Superfluidity of naughtiness. I guess this probably had an English accent, you know. Just guessing. He said, if you cannot be true to Christ in your coward heart and recreant to your Lord, do not profess to be his disciple, I beseech you. He that is married to the world or flint-hearted had better return to his house, for he is of no service to this war. That's pretty harsh, isn't it? Is it true? I think so. And these boys had already decided at a young age what they were going to do. They basically, we don't know this, but they did not doubt God's ability, nor did they presume to know God's will, because I want you to see how they answer when we go in there. We're going to read to verse 18, then I have a few questions for you. So let's go back to verse 13. Then Nebuchadnezzar, there he was, listen what it is, Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so they brought these men before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? He says, now if you're, this is what he does. Now if you're ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, and the psaltery, and the symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Notice what he says. And this is important to note for the rest of the chapter. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? Well, he's about to find out, isn't he? But to me, that is the central point. He wants to be worshiped like a God. He's putting all these rules and regulations and promising death and destruction upon those who do not conform. But he takes time in the middle of this chapter to says, whose God is going to be able to deliver you from my hands? Well, he just set himself up, didn't he? He really did. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, answer to the king Nebuchadnezzar. Oh, Nebuchadnezzar. He says, remember, he's furious. And these boys says, we have no need to answer you in this matter. Hello. Now listen, if I'm getting on my boys, and this boy is 12, 13 years old, and he's smarting off to me, and he says that, what kind of reaction do you think he's going to get out of me as his father? Oh, Dad, I don't have to answer you. Say, what? Your mind goes somewhere else. It kind of leaves your body for a bit. You know? As if, and I'm saying that being funny, but this king wasn't playing around. He's pretty much full of himself. He's evil. He definitely don't think like these boys, but I don't think we can take it like that. But I can imagine the king took it like that. But this was, listen, my friends, this is what is important. They began to stay firm with what they believed about the one and truly only God. And so they could say to him with all confidence, even though they didn't know how God was or if he was going to deliver them, he says, we don't have to answer you, O king. He says, we have no need to answer you in this matter. And if that's the case, this is what they say. Our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. Because they go back and say, who's going to deliver you from my hands? And they answered and say, our God. And I love this. Verse 18 says, but yet, if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the golden image which you have set up. So they basically said, come hell or high water, no matter what happens, we are not going to serve your God. And whether we're delivered or not, he is still God. And they're basically saying they know he is able to deliver, but they're not yet sure if that is his will. How many times have we faced that? I know the abilities of God, but we don't always know how he's going to answer or what's going to happen. But I want you to see the confidence and the bravery of these three Hebrew young men. It's something we should say to the enemy every day. I don't know about you. How many of y'all know when the enemy's talking in your ear? You can be by yourself. It's a Wednesday afternoon. I probably had at least 4 or 5 times. You can't do that. They ain't going to listen to you. That's not going to work. And there ain't nobody here, y'all. I wasn't talking to him on the phone. I wasn't talking to you on the phone. Where do you think that comes from? Oh, the enemy will talk to us. And I can bet you that the enemy was trying to talk to them. Even when an angry, vile, evil king looks at you and says, you're about to be... I mean, it took a lot of guts, didn't it? It really did. So, let's go back. When threatened to be cast into the fiery furnace, how did they respond? What's the 2 things we remember? God would deliver them. And then what was the other? But if not, what did he say? You're not going to serve your gods. Like I said, he said gods, and he just added himself as one of the many gods. They might have said this, y'all. They could have went and said, there's nothing to gain by resisting. Wouldn't we be more good by living? In other words, it ain't worth dying over. Some of us might say it this way. That is not a hill I choose to die on. It goes along with pick your battles wisely. These boys have picked their battles wisely. They said nothing is going to come in between ourselves and our relationship with God. Now remember, these boys were in captivity. This is what's awesome. That's all they had was their belief. I mean, their freedom had been stripped away. All they had was their God. God had them right where he wanted them. And so there they were. So, We might have done more good by living. It's easy to say we must live, but in reality, I love this. What I think this story reminds us in this second response that they give is some of us need to remember we are to die to self every day. Some of you are over 80 years old, and I bet you still say, there are things I've got to die to myself about every day. So dying to self. So if you're going to die making a stand for God. I love it. I love it. Let's look on down. So, you can imagine what happens. He's still full of fury. In verse 19, Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the expression on his face changed. That means he got demented looking. Anybody ever seen that not Lord of the Flies, The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings? There's a scene in that first one where Bilbo Baggins, or whatever his name is trying to get that ring, and all of a sudden it scared me. I remembered I jumped out of the theater and grabbed my brother and smacked him because I went, what? Like that. And he hit me because I hit him in the process. His whole face changed, just like he went evil. I don't know if you remember that. Probably, I don't go to the movies a lot. This was like 20 years ago. I'd go home at Christmas time, and my brother and I, they bring these movies out at Christmas time, so for 3 years in a row, we went and saw the trilogy that way. That thing was the scariest part of all them monsters and everything. And y'all might be saying, well, why would you watch that? It was written by a guy that wrote with a huge he wrote with huge Christian overtone. It was a reflection of the spiritual battles that were going on with mankind. And but how, if you held on to something that wasn't of God, how it could change you. Well, his expression changed. As furious wasn't bad enough, it says that his expression changed on his face. Okay? He spoke, commanded that they heat the furnace. He was so mad. He said, go, just go. He wasn't in his right mind. Go heat that thing up 7 times hotter, didn't he? He said that he commanded certain mighty men of valor who were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fire. And then these men were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and their other garments, and they were cast in the midst of the fiery furnace. And therefore, because the king's command was urgent, and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, I've always thought, even as a kid at this story, I was like, well, how close did they have to get? It's like, did they die as they were going up, putting them in? And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego just walked on in? Or as they pushed them in is when they died? I don't know. We're not given the exact dimensions of what took place there. We just know that it happened. But the three young men are put in there. All right? And so as the 3 men were being cast in the fiery furnace, what happened? The king's men of valor, people he depended upon, they died. So think about it. In his rage, in his stupidity, having the fiery furnace, and I think that's ironic that it's 7 times hotter. I'm like, how do you know it's 7 times hotter? I mean, what kind of fuel did you have to put on? What kind of windage? I'm not a blacksmith, but there had to be some old-timey kind of ways, but they knew it. They knew by the glow of the coals or whatever. I don't know what that furnace was actually made of, but it had to be able to contain that kind of heat. And that it wouldn't melt itself. And so, what happened? It killed him, didn't it? So, in his rage, in his stupidity, the king cost him some very valuable men because of his rage. There's one lesson he should be learning. Every time he gets mad, he does silly things, right? Then these men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the burning fire. So, it's all one motion. As they died, they fell down. They're in there. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he arose in haste, and he spoke, saying, this doesn't seem like a lot of time. The guys die. They're sad. Hey, can't believe that happened. And he spoke, saying to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? Notice nobody says, oh, king, may you live forever. They were straight to it. It's like, and the answer then said to the king, true, O king, He says, look, he answered. He said, I see 4 men loose walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the form of the fourth. Now, according to this, it says the Son of God, capital G. Now, I don't know why Nebuchadnezzar's words are written out that way, but I think that he may not have meant it that way, but it's for you, and it gives us a picture of who it might have been, because it's capital. And anytime you see capital, G-O-D, or the Lord, capitalized, it refers to the name of God. So this is, we can pass by this and not realize why it's capitalized. Now, who's got a King James Version? Who's reading King James Version? This is New King James. Is there any of y'all where it's not capitalized? That's what I'd like to know. And what version? Is it ESV? NIV? Oh, yeah, you got to burn that thing in a fiery furnace 7 times hotter. Yeah, you got to get rid of that. No, I'm just teasing. I was just curious. The Son of God? Is Son? Yeah, is Son of God capitalized? Son? Okay. Anyway, so we're given that. I just asked just because I wanted to know. And so, what did Nebuchadnezzar see when he looked in the fiery furnace? What did he see? 4 people. 3 of which we know. One he is referred to as Son of God, or Son of God, capitalized in mine. And it says, so the Son of God was actually with them in the fiery furnace. Sometimes, and this is what I say, sometimes we're aware of Jesus' presence in our trials, and sometimes we are not. But he is there nonetheless. And Spurgeon adds this. I love this. Let's look at this whole story up to this point. This is what Spurgeon observed, that God's people we are often in this fiery furnace. And we're there because of different kinds of furnaces and situations that we go through. And they serve different purposes in life. And he suggested this. He says there's a furnace that man prepares. He says there's a furnace that Satan prepares. And he says there's a furnace that God prepares. It kind of goes back to Joseph and say, you know, what man and Satan meant to harm and to bring death, God turned to the good. So God helps prepare that furnace. So God is the one, as we know, they said, can deliver us from this trial. He can actually sustain us in the middle of a trial. Trapp quotes the English martyr who said this as he was burned at the stake. This is what happened. He said, "Oh, ye papists." He says, "Behold, ye look for miracles. Here now you may see a miracle, for in this fire I feel no more pain than if I were in a bed of down." He says, "But it is me as a bed of roses." He's like, in a minute I ain't going to feel nothing. And he was just saying it. You can harm the body, you can't kill the soul. We know that. And so I'll go on. Who do y'all think this might have been? This 4th person. Jesus. Some people put as a representation of the pre-incarnate appearance of Christ. Now there are a couple of other times that I believe, I'm not convinced, but I believe in my heart. I've searched it and I've looked and others suggest it, and the more and more I look at them, in Joshua 5, I believe that's Jesus or an appearance of Jesus or an incarnate that we see. There are some times that they say an angel, but if you look a little further, it's different. It's a different kind of an angel. But later on, King Nebuchadnezzar is also going to say the opposite. Not just the Son of God. He's going to say, you sent an angel. So that's why there's various beliefs here. In my heart, I believe this is a representation of the incarnate Christ. Okay? All right. So possibly Jesus, pre-incarnate of Christ. Verse 27 says this, verse 26 and 27. Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace, and he spoke, saying, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now look, has anybody worked with blacksmiths? Have you ever been Sammy, you've been around a lot of fires. Fires are not silent, are they? When there's a lot of sound with fires, especially if the wind's blowing, things are being burnt up. I don't think Nebuchadnezzar walked up as close. He can walk right up to it because he died, but I don't think he walked up and said, Shadrach. He was screaming. Okay? I do that because I want you to understand the drama. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He said, servants of the, notice what he said, servants of the Most High God. Capitalized. He says, come out, come here. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire. Came from the midst of the fire. Fire wasn't put out. Fire's still going. They walked out of a fire. And the satraps, administrators, governors, and the king's counselors gathered together, and they saw these men whose bodies the fire had no power. The hair on their head was not singed, nor were their garments affected. This is the one that always got me. The smell of fire was not upon them. When I was a child, in 1973, my mother and father both smoked. And I wasn't but 4 years old, and my dad did something very foolish, and I did something more foolish. He left his Ziploc lighter on the end table in our trailer. I had seen my dad fire that thing up. You flip it open, you take the little wheel and you spin it, and guess what? Instant flame. This was not my first time playing with fire. I'm surprised my mom didn't kill us. Because my brother and I snuck out one night, and we had a gas stove, and we knew to put the grease in the frying pan, and yeah, we woke them up one night. Because of all this, my parents decided to lock our bedroom doors from the outside so that we wouldn't get out. So in 1973, I got the lighter, I went up under the bed, and that netting, whatever that is on the bottom of the box springs, you know, you catch it on fire, just pretty. I still, to this day, remember. I got to get out underneath this bed. And I remember walking in the living room going, hey, Mom, my Aunt Gladys, the one they were all there. And I remember saying, and then by that time, they realized it was like I got pushed out of the way. Those women came with frying pans full of water and beating the bread. Fire department got called. Before it was all over with, they burned a big hole in the side of the trailer where my bedroom was at. I've never forgot it. For days, you couldn't get the smell. Everything had to be same. I don't even know how to get rid of it, but you know the smell. You couldn't get rid of the smell. You probably think I got beat to death on that one. Probably should have. Kind of my dad's fault. My grandmother, his mother, she's a saint woman, come into my aid and said, you're not going to spank that child. You're the one that left the lighter there. Boy, was I glad for Grandma then. If I wanted to run away from him, I ran to her house every chance I had. How many of y'all had grandmamas like that? Yeah. Yeah. Now, if you did something to her, you got the beating of your life, but nobody else was going to give it to you in her, presence. And so what I'm saying is when I see that there has no smell of fire on them, that by itself is pretty important and powerful to me. Just because of my own, like I can still tell you what it smells like. I know it. But there was no smell of the fire on it. It says Nebuchadnezzar spoke and saying, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his, there it is, angel, capitalized, his angel, and delivered his servants who trusted him, and they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship in any god except their own God. Now, he got it, didn't he? He pretty much got the story. Got it all down what they said, and he fully recalled it. Okay, here's the possible things, demonstrations of how complete the deliverance was. This whole account could be a lot, possibly like a type of future of Israel's great tribulation. Just kind of looking at it. Nebuchadnezzar could be like the Antichrist, who forces the whole world into one religion and idolatry. Nebuchadnezzar's image is like the image described in Revelation 13. The whole world were commanded to worship. The fiery furnace is a lot like the Great Tribulation, which will be great, the afflictions for the Jews. The three Hebrew men are a lot like Israel, who will be preserved through the tribulation. The executioners who perished are like those in the league with the Antichrist, who Jesus will slay at his return. This is not me. This is something that I thought was kind of cool. They drew up this comparison. And then, like I've already said, the mysterious Daniel, where's Daniel? The mysterious Daniel, the absent Daniel, is a lot like the church, not even present at the time of the Great Tribulation. Some cool thoughts, right? Well, there's one last question. The last two verses, and then we'll be gone. He says, therefore, he said, I'm going to make a decree that any people, nation, or languages which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut to pieces. He didn't say that they couldn't talk about the other gods, but you can't say anything bad about what this God has said. And then he goes back and says they will be cut to pieces and their houses shall be made heap. That's what he promised them in the beginning if they could not determine his dream. That punishment seemed to befit a lot of different things. But you're not going to talk bad about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's God. Because there was no other God who can deliver like this. This is important because go back. What he set in motion, he says, what God can deliver you from my hands? And as important as he thought he was, he got showed down that, hey, there's something bigger than what I think I am. Isn't that the whole process of coming to God? That he's so much more than I am. There's someone else I have to answer to beside myself. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the province of Babylon. So what conclusions did the king draw? What conclusion? That what? Exactly. No other God can deliver. And what did he do for these three men? They got promoted. I don't want to leave this at the end to say, boy, I wish it happened this way every time. It's just in this particular thing, God was bringing protection upon them in a time of crisis and slavery, and they had been, And isn't it funny that they were enslaved, but they were even more enslaved, thrown in, it says that they were bound. The other thing that we've talked about before, but I got to say, mention as we close tonight, is that as soon as they were thrown in there and they took note, it says they fell in there, so they were bound. But when he looked, it says they were walking around. Not just this fourth guy, but they were walking in the fire around. So everything that had been meant to make them bound was burned up. Their clothes wasn't. They didn't smell like fire. There was a lot of, but those things that were bound up were gone. And that's what God does. If you live and you trust, and you know what? Here's the thing. If God did not deliver them, the same thing still would have happened. They would have been freed. That if you want true freedom, you got to trust God, no matter how it plays out. I don't know. There's so many lessons that we can learn from that. So, with that, Brother David, would you close us out in prayer tonight, please, sir?